I am Rabbi Era Goldstein, and the story I am about to share with you will completely challenge everything you've ever believed about the afterlife and the Messiah. For 51 years, I lived a life dedicated to the Torah, faithfully serving my congregation in Brooklyn. But there was one night, a winter night, that changed everything for me. A night where I died for exactly 14 minutes and 16 seconds. Before diving into the details of this death and the extraordinary events that followed, it's important for you to understand who I was. I was born into a highly respected Orthodox Jewish family in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and my life seemed destined from the moment I was born. My father, Rabbi Solomon Goldstein, was a prominent Talmudic scholar who managed to flee Europe just before the horrors of the Holocaust. My mother, Sarah, came from a prestigious lineage of rabbis dating back to the 18th century in Lithuania. From my childhood, I could feel the weight of this heritage on my shoulders, like a tallit draped over me, heavy with centuries of tradition. I showed an exceptional aptitude for learning, especially in biblical Hebrew and Aramaic. By the age of 13, I could recite entire sections of the Torah from memory. My teachers began to call me the Living Scroll. My bar mitzvah speech, focused on Isaiah's messianic prophecies, attracted scholars from all over New York. By the age of 18, I was already prepared for leadership. My years in yeshiva were marked by unwavering commitment to studying every nuance of Jewish law and tradition. I spent countless hours debating with my classmates the most subtle details of halakha, often staying awake until dawn, immersing myself in ancient commentaries. It was during this time that I met Rabbi Menachem Kavo, a man who would become my most influential teacher and mentor. Rabbi Kavo was unlike any of my previous teachers. While he focused on the technical aspects of Jewish law, he urged us to seek the spirit behind the law. The Torah is not just a book of rules, he would say. It is a living conversation with the divine. These words planted a seed that would later grow and shape my approach to religious leadership in a way I could never have anticipated. At 25, I married Rebecca, the daughter of another renowned rabbi. Our union was seen as a perfect marriage, two strong religious lineages coming together. Rebecca shared my passion for the study of the Torah, and together we built what others considered an exemplary Jewish home. We were fortunate to have 3 children: David, now 24, who is studying to become a rabbi; Sarah, 24, who is preparing for her master's in Jewish studies; and Benjamin, our youngest at 16, who shares my deep love for the Torah. At 32, I was appointed chief rabbi of the B Shalom congregation, making me one of the youngest rabbis in Brooklyn. Under my leadership, the congregation thrived, growing from 300 families to over 1,000. I became known for my meticulous and thoughtful approach to Jewish law and my ability to apply ancient wisdom to contemporary challenges. My Shabbat sermons drew visitors from other synagogues, and my scholarly articles on Jewish law were published in prestigious religious journals. Yet, despite all this success, there were moments of quiet doubt, times when questions lingered in the back of my mind. During my personal study sessions, I sometimes came across verses from the prophets that seemed to indicate directions I wasn't ready to follow. Isaiah 53, in particular, left me perplexed. The traditional explanations of this passage about the suffering servant no longer seemed adequate to me. Although I pushed those doubts aside, burying them under layers of scholarly analysis, there was one particular moment that should have served as a wake-up call. About 5 years ago, a young man from our congregation, a recent Columbia University graduate, came into my office with questions about messianic prophecies. He had studied them on his own and arrived at conclusions that deeply troubled him. Rather than thoughtfully addressing his concerns, I brushed them aside with repeated arguments and sent him away with a stack of apologetic literature. I will never forget the look of disappointment in his eyes. It haunted me for weeks. My life followed a predictable routine: morning prayer, study session, counsel to the faithful, classes, writing sermons, participating in community events. I was respected, comfortable, and completely sure of my place in the world. Even when faced with tough questions or alternative viewpoints, I always had a series of answers ready to defend my theological position. I was in every sense of the word an accomplished rabbi living the life I was trained for. And then, on January 12, 2012, came a night that would change everything forever. It wasn't just my death, even though that was remarkable in itself. What was even more extraordinary was that everything I had built my life on, all the certainties I had clung to, all the arguments I had perfected, were about to be shaken in a way I could never have anticipated. The day began like any other. I led morning prayers, taught my usual Talmud class, and spent the afternoon counseling a young couple preparing for marriage. But as night fell, something quite mundane happened that would ultimately trigger events beyond my control. As we were eating dinner, my wife, Rebecca, accidentally spilled water on the toaster while trying to grab the salt. It seemed to be the most ordinary of incidents, a simple domestic accident that happens in every household. Rebecca suggested that we just buy a new toaster, but I insisted on fixing it myself. "It's just water," I reassured her. "Once it dries, it will work just fine." I had no idea that this moment would lead to a revelation that would shake the very foundations of everything I believed. But at that moment, at 11:47 p.m. on that winter night, I was just a tired rabbi trying to fix a toaster. The kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional passing car outside. The house was enveloped in the silence of a late hour in a city that never really sleeps. Rebecca had gone to bed hours earlier after urging me not to stay up too late. Our youngest, Benjamin, had spent the night at a friend's house preparing for a debate competition the next day. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall, marking the last moments before a meeting that would change everything. I had unplugged the toaster a few hours earlier to let it dry out naturally. Now I wanted to check if any moisture remained before plugging it back in. It was a task I had performed countless times with other devices. Simple, routine, and harmless. But as I tilted the toaster to inspect the inside with a small flashlight, I noticed a few droplets of water still clinging to the heating elements. Without thinking, I grabbed a cloth to dry them. In my fatigue, I forgot to consider the possibility that water might have settled inside the electrical components. The moment my hand touched the metallic interior, a violent electric shock surged through my body, throwing me backward. My head struck the sharp edge of the granite countertop. At that instant, everything went black. Not the ordinary darkness that accompanies closing your eyes, but a deep, profound darkness that seemed to engulf me entirely. You close your eyes at night hoping to find the familiar darkness of sleep, but instead, you're consumed by an absolute void, an abyss that swallows not just the world around you, but the very essence of your being. The kitchen, the place you call home, even your own sense of self, all of it disappears in an instant, leaving only emptiness behind. Throughout my decades as a rabbi, I have often spoken about death, guided countless families through their grief, and performed farewell ritual. I delved into religious study, immersing myself in the wisdom of the Torah, the Talmud, and countless commentaries. Yet, nothing throughout all those years of training, nothing in the thousands of discussions and theological debates, had prepared me for what I was about to experience. The transition from life to death was not a gradual fading, not the peaceful drifting many speak of. For a moment I was in my kitchen, surrounded by the familiar warmth of home, and the next, I found myself in a place that defied any understanding of the word place. The air, or whatever we might call it, was thick, suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight that felt heavy, not just on my body, but on my very soul. Every passing moment stretched into eternity, as if time had lost all meaning. Here, the darkness that enveloped me was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't merely the absence of light, but something alive, vibrating with a dark and malevolent force that seemed to feed on fear, regret. Throughout all my years of study, I had endlessly debated with my peers about the nature of the afterlife. We discussed the concepts of Gehenna and Gan Eden, the traditional visions of eternal reward or punishment. But those intellectual discussions now felt utterly futile. The reality I was experiencing far surpassed anything we had imagined. It was not the serene sleep that many of my colleagues had spoken of, nor the peace of the resurrection. What I was witnessing was far more immediate, tangible, and terrifying. As my mind adjusted to this new world, I began to hear sounds, haunting causes that no human being should ever have to endure. These weren't the dramatic cries of torment one might expect, but the cries of agony from souls trapped in the grip of an irreversible truth. They weren't cries of physical pain, but a deeper and more heart-wrenching awareness, the torment of understanding the full weight of the choices they had made in life. Each cry was a story, the painful unraveling of a life of decisions that had led them to this place of eternal regret and loss. What struck me most was that these voices were not foreign to me. They spoke in languages I knew: Hebrew, Yiddish, and even English. But despite the language differences, the message was the same. The writing was filled with a profound sadness, a raw acknowledgement from those who had been cast aside. I heard fragments of prayer, snippets of the ancient text, sacred words once spoken with reverence, now torn from the depths of despair. The words were no longer uttered with devotion, but ripped out with anguish, as if lamenting forever lost opportunities. I dreamt, or perhaps I was being led into this realm of shadows and sorrow, unable to tell if I was walking, floating, or carried by an invisible force. The darkness around me began to take shape, transforming into a massive cave carved from living shadow. The walls seemed to breathe, animated by a threatening presence, and upon closer inspection, a chilling realization struck me. Faces emerged from the walls, countless faces frozen in expressions of absolute despair. It was then that the true horror of this place revealed itself. Amidst this sea of agonizing faces, I started to recognize some people I had known in my life, or men whose teachings had shaped my understanding of the Torah, figures whose wisdom I had long revered. Among them was Rabbi Menin Kavod, my most influential teacher during my years at the yeshiva. His face appeared twisted by agony beyond anything I could have imagined. His eyes, once shining with the joy of Torah study, now reflected a terrible understanding that weighed heavily on his soul. "The Israelites," he said to me, his voice echoing in the cave. "We were all wrong. We studied the prophecies, we knew the signs, but in our pride, we refused to see them." These words, once spoken with the authority of a master teacher, now bore the painful weight of someone who had understood the truth too late. Next to him, the face of Rabbi Shlomo, a scholar whose commentaries I had long admired, was also marked by the signs of eternal regret. "We made the law our idol," he lamented, "and we missed the Messiah we claimed to be waiting for. The prophecies had been fulfilled before their eyes, yet they had chosen to remain blind to the truth." As their words resonated within me, memories began flooding back. Memories of my own studies, my own arguments against the messianic interpretation of certain texts. I recalled our long debates about Isaiah 53, the theological frameworks we had carefully constructed to explain its obvious implications. Here, in this place of ultimate truth, those arguments felt fragile, devoid of substance, nothing more than wisps of smoke. Other faces appeared, each one a figure I had known: Rabbi Era Goldstein, whose treatise I had studied in opposition to Christian interpretations of the messianic prophets; Rabbi David Levine, who had spent his life protecting young Jews from missionary influences. Now all bore witness to the terrible price to be paid for their misguided choices. With each face, each voice, the air grew heavier, weighed down by the burden of regret. Then came the realization that shattered everything I had believed. Their souls were not punished by an external force. The torment they endured came from within, from the crushing weight of their own awareness of what they had rejected in life. I wanted to look away, to flee from this horrific truth. But in this place, there was no turning back. Every argument I had made against the messianity of Jesus, every sermon I preached reinforcing traditional views, every time I told someone to refuse to question, I was confronted with all of it. The voices of those around me began to blend together, forming a chorus of lamentation and regret. They recited passages from the prophets, Isaiah, Zechariah, Daniel, but their words were now imbued with a terrible clarity. The suffering servant of Isaiah, the pierced servant of Zechariah, the precise timeline of the Messiah's coming, all of this seemed so painfully clear now, in the light of this final revelation. Just when I thought I could bear it no longer, something incredible happened. A small point of light appeared in the distance, so faint at first that it resembled a distant star. But it slowly grew, at first gradually, then with increasing intensity. It wasn't a harsh artificial light like that of the physical world. It was a pure and vibrant light, radiating truth, love, and a presence that seemed to alter the very structure of this realm. As the light grew stronger, I noticed the reactions of the souls around me. Some turned away as if the light caused them physical pain, while others, driven by an insatiable desire, reached out toward it, desperate for its warmth. The faces on the walls began to recede, though their expressions of regret remained etched in memory. The heart of the cries faded into a distant murmur, replaced by a profound silence that buzzed with possibilities, an unsettling silence, yet filled with hope. At that moment, I understood that this was not the end, but a moment of truth and transformation, where the very essence of existence was laid bare. And in that light, I saw something beyond regret. I saw a glimmer of hope. The light continued to intensify, not just becoming brighter, but also more present, until it seemed to saturate every inch of this supernatural space. Then, from within that radiant expanse, a figure slowly emerged. At first I could not discern any individual features. The brilliance was too overwhelming, but the presence that accompanied this figure was so immense, so sacred, that my body instinctively reacted, and I fell to my knees. It was not simply an angel or a messenger, but something much deeper, far more significant than anything I could have imagined. Every part of my being recognized an authority that eclipsed all the teachings, all the theological arguments I had meticulously studied over the years. It was as if this presence carried the weight of the universe, and in its closeness, I felt my own insignificance. As the figure drew near, details began to take shape. Its attire appeared simple, a white robe, but there was something uniquely divine about it. The fabric seemed woven from the light itself, as if it were not a fabric at all, but an extension of the radiance that enveloped its face. Initially too dazzling to be seen directly, it slowly began to reveal itself. It was a face that seemed to carry the wisdom of the ages, and yet it was timeless. There was in him an essence that was both deeply Jewish and universally transcendent. a blend of ancient but it was his eyes that completely captivated me. They seemed to contain the love of the universe in its entirety, and held a wisdom so profound that it penetrated the deepest corners of my soul. In his presence, all the knowledge I had accumulated during my years of religious studies, all the arguments and convictions I had carefully crafted about God, about truth, seemed to dissolve. It was as if all my certainties were vanishing, leaving me bare, vulnerable, reduced to the simple awareness of my own existence in the face of his overwhelming reality. The same radiant light that emanated from him seemed to pierce me, illuminating every shadow of my soul, revealing my hidden motivations, my unconscious biases, and every corner of darkness within me. The faces that had once appeared on the walls, once so lively and real, now felt like distant, fading memories. They were nothing but the phantom images of a past with no real substance compared to the living reality. The voices of my former teachers, the echoes of their learned arguments, all fell silent in the presence of this one true teacher. Even the heavy, oppressive atmosphere that had weighed on me moments earlier seemed to vanish, as if it had never existed, dissipating like mist under the rays of a rising sun. And as I knelt, astonished, unable to speak or move, I became vividly aware of something extraordinary unfolding within me. It was as if the scales were falling from my spiritual eyes. For the first time, I could see the writing I had studied for so long with perfect clarity. Thoughts flooded my mind, each overflowing with new meaning, new depth. Prophecies I had understood one way my whole life were now revealing themselves in a totally different light. The words of Isaiah that I had read countless times danced before my mental eye in a way that made my heart soar with joy. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. We will call him Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. How could I have failed to see the true depth of these words? How could I have spent so long overlooking their meaning? The prophecy of Micah echoed in my conscience. But you, Bethlehem, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Struck me like a lightning bolt. Everything aligned. Each prophecy fell into place with unwavering clarity. The words of Zechariah took on a new and powerful meaning. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me, the one they have pierced. The weight of these words, understood in all their light, was almost unbearable. In that moment of clarity, I realized that my entire life had been a preparation for this encounter. Every hour spent studying the Torah, every theological debate, every sermon I had preached had led me to this profound truth. But unlike the souls confined within the walls of darkness, I had been granted something that was denied to them, a chance to return, to share this new understanding, this revelation of truth. The figure before me raised his hands, and I saw the marks that would forever alter my perception of everything I had always believed. These were not mere scars. They were the living proof of the fulfillment of prophecy, signs of a love so deep and so infinite that it willingly accepted death for the sake of others. In that moment, suspended between life and death, between darkness and light, I felt completely transformed. The man I had once been, Rabbi Era Goldstein, a man defined by his strict adherence to tradition and law, was being destroyed, transformed by this encounter with the living truth. The light around us continued to intensify, and with it, a sense of urgency. I knew in some way that my time in this place was limited, that I would be sent back with a mission, a message to share with the world. The darkness that had welcomed me at the beginning of this journey now felt like a distant memory, even though its warning remained etched in my soul. As I knelt, bathed in this divine light, I understood with absolute certainty that everything in my life was about to change. My purpose, my ministry, my understanding of the Scripture. There would be no turning back. Nothing would ever be the same again. The only question that remained was whether I would have the courage to accept this new reality upon my return to the world I once knew. This was not the end of my experience, but a turning point, the beginning of a conversation that would reshape everything I had once believed about God, the Messiah, and the purpose of my existence. And this conversation, with its profound implications, would unfold in the next chapter of my testimony. "Ezra, my son," said the voice, not only in my ears, but deep within my soul. Each word resonated with a weight and authority I had never encountered, even in my most pious moments of religious study. It was the voice that had given birth to creation, the voice that had thundered from Sinai, the voice that had called the prophets through the ages. And now, in the most unimaginable moment, it was speaking to me. I remained kneeling, overwhelmed by its presence. The light radiating from it was both blinding and completely illuminating, as if it were revealing the true nature of everything it touched. In that moment, I understood the deep meaning of Isaiah's words. "Woe is me, for I am lost. You have sought me all your life," continued the voice, with centuries of patience woven into each syllable. "You have read the Scriptures, taught others, sought the truth. But you sought me where I was not, and you rejected me where I was." Each of these words struck my heart with the force of an undeniable truth. Memories flooded back to me, the countless sermons I had preached to deny him, the students I had misled by denying the fulfillment of his prophecy, the arguments I had constructed to distance him from the Scriptures. Yet, in the voice that spoke to me, there was no condemnation. There was only an outpouring of love and an invitation to understanding. "Lord," I murmured, my voice barely audible, trembling under the weight of the revelation. "Are you?" "I am," he replied. Those two simple words resonated deeply within me. It was as if I was hearing the echoes of the burning bush, the thunder on Sinai, the sacred moments of every divine encounter recounted in our sacred texts. "I am the one your people have been waiting for, the one your prophets have foretold, the one you yourself have longed to see." As he spoke, the space around us changed in a way that defied earthly understanding. We were no longer in the dark, shadowy realm I had encountered at first. But we were not in a familiar world either. Instead, we seemed suspended in a place where time and eternity intertwined, where truth was no longer an abstract concept to debate, but a living, breathing reality. "Show me," I pleaded, my mind still clinging to its scholarly instincts, even amid this supernatural revelation. "Help me understand what I have missed all these years." A smile spread across his face, a smile that expressed both immense patience and profound joy. It was as if he welcomed my desire for understanding. "Let us reason together," he said, echoing the invitation found in Isaiah 1:18. In an instant, the echoes of our conversation seemed to come alive, infused with the presence of the Scriptures I had studied all my life. Hebrew and Aramaic texts floated in the space around us, their words vibrating with a new and deeper meaning that far surpassed the dry academic interpretations I had known before. "Start with Moses," he indicated, pointing to the floating scrolls. "What did he write about me?" I gazed in wonder as the sacred passages of the Torah shimmered and glowed, lit by a splendor I had never imagined. Genesis 3:15, the first messianic prophecy, speaks of the seed of the woman who will ultimately crush the serpent's head. The binding of Isaac in Genesis 22, which had always seemed to me a perplexing narrative, now unfolded like a living prophetic image. And then Deuteronomy 18:15, Moses' own prophecy about a future prophet like him who would arise. Every text was clear, each unambiguous, pointing directly to the Messiah. "But Lord," I protested, my mind racing to reconcile this new understanding with my lifelong beliefs. "We've always interpreted these passages differently. We've built entire theological frameworks around an expectation we created ourselves." He calmly completed my unspoken thought. "Tell me, Ezra, when Daniel spoke of the Messiah who would be cut off after 69 weeks, what date did your calculations provide?" I was taken aback with a sudden surge of understanding. Daniel 9's prophecy had always posed challenges for traditional Jewish interpretation, as its timeline indicated that the Messiah would come and be cut off during the 1st century AD. We had crafted countless explanations to avoid this disturbing truth, but now the timeline was undeniable. It pointed to that precise moment in history. I murmured, barely able to breathe. "At your death?" "Yes," he affirmed gently, his voice both tender and full of unwavering truth. "Isaiah 53, he continued. "How have you explained the suffering servant?" This passage, perhaps more than any other, has been the most difficult for us to understand. We've always insisted that it referred to Israel as a nation and not as an individual. But as I contemplated this, the text unfolded before me with undeniable clarity. The figure of the suffering servant was not that of a collective people, but that of a unique individual who would be wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities. The truth hit me like a bell. We had deliberately misinterpreted this, I admitted, the weight of this realization heavy on my heart. We could not accept a suffering Messiah because he didn't match our expectations of glory and national restoration. Yet, I now understood that even King David spoke of suffering in Psalm 22. The piercing of hands and feet, the dividing of garments, the cry of anguish. How could we have missed these clear prophetic signs? "Is your people still waiting for what has already happened?" he said, his voice filled with compassion. "They examine the scriptures every day, yet they do not see that all of this testifies to me. You have been brought here not only for your own sake, but also for theirs." As he spoke, I felt something break inside me, not a physical break, but a spiritual one. It was as if all the arguments I had ever built to deny his messianic claim were gently and inexorably being dismantled. All the rational explanations that had once seemed so convincing began to dissolve in the presence of the truth. "But Lord," I hesitated, thinking of my congregation, my family, and my role in the community. "They won't listen to me. They'll think I've lost my mind, that it was just a hallucination brought on by the accident." He smiled once more, and in that smile, I saw both understanding and an authority that eased my fears. "Some will reject your testimony just as they rejected mine, but others will listen and believe. Remember, you are not alone in this situation. My Spirit will accompany you, and I will give you the words to speak." I then turned to the Torah, the sacred laws that had governed my life. "But what about the law?" I asked. "And what happens to all the commandments, the rules, the rituals?" "I did not come to abolish the law," he replied, citing his own words from Matthew 5:17. "I came to fulfill it. The law points to me. It testifies about me. Its true purpose has always been to lead you to this moment of recognition. The law is holy, but it was never meant to be the final destination. It has always been a tutor, guiding you in my direction." As he spoke, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The entire system of biblical law, the sacrifices, the feasts, the priesthood was designed for the the Passover lamb, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles. Each of them was a prophetic image of the redemption he would bring. Your people celebrates its feasts, he continued, but they have forgotten their prophetic meaning. They celebrate Passover, but do not recognize the Lamb of God. He observes Yom Kippur, but does not see that the final atonement has already been accomplished. He builds under Caesar, but does not understand that I have come to dwell among you. Each of these words seem to shed light on another area of understanding. Centuries of Jewish traditions and interpretations were being transformed before my eyes. Not abolished, but fulfilled in a way I never could have imagined. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, knowing that my life could never be the same again. "Tell them what you have seen and heard," he replied. "Share with them the truth that has been revealed to you. Some will reject it, just as they rejected me. Some will persecute you, just as they persecuted me. But others are searching, seeking, questioning. It is for them that you must speak." As he spoke of persecution, I had visions of the difficulties that awaited me, being rejected by my congregation, the sadness in my family's eyes, accusations of betrayal from my colleagues. But strangely, these images did not frighten me as they would have in the past. His presence filled me with a peace that surpassed all earthly concern. "Remember Ezra," he continued, "you are not alone in this situation. Throughout history, many of your fellow countrymen have recognized me as their Messiah. Even today, thousands of Jewish believers have retained their Jewish identity while recognizing me as their Savior. This was something I had never considered. The possibility of being Jewish and accepting Jesus as the Messiah. Throughout my life, the two had seemed mutually exclusive, but now it was starting to make sense to me. Accepting Jesus as the Messiah was not a departure from my Jewish heritage. It was even its fulfillment.